Hey, this is Lindsay here, and as promised, we're gonna break down each bike from the shootout individually and give you guys a little bit more information about how that bike basically finished where it did, a little more about the characteristics, the positives, the negatives, and a little bit more about the riders' individual comments and why they rated them there and where they rated them. So before we jump right into it, thank a couple people that made this shootout happen. Foremost, number one, Shootout Motorsports, big help in being able to procure all these bikes, be able to get them off the dealership floor. Dunlop helped us out, be able to keep all the bikes with fresh tires for the test. DCMX Tools, Epoxy at SoCal, Oakley and Fox sponsored it, and then the presenting sponsor for all my individual videos, Works Chassis Lab, company me and a buddy is the engineer for a large suspension company started. We do all the chassis components for Star Racing, MCR Honda, Factory Cowie Team, Rock River, MX101, Bowers, Hep Suzuki, etc. Check us out, workschassilab.com, or down below description, give our Instagram page a follow. That'd be a huge help. So let's jump into this. I'm gonna go ahead and go through each rider's ranking first off. If you haven't watched the shootout video yet, then you may not know the overall results. If you haven't watched it, well, this bad boy took the number one spot, and it did that with scoring a 1, 1, 1, 2, 2 across our 5 test riders. So 3 of them rated as their number one bike, the other 2 rated as their second bike. In my case, it was my personal winner, so I'll start with my comments as well. I'm about 5'9", just a little bit over 160 pounds during the course of this test, and the main reason it won for me is over the 3 tracks we rode at, Cahuilla, Glen Helen, and Fox Raceway, I barely made any changes, and that really seemed to be a consensus amongst our riders, is how few changes we actually made from track to track and how wide that operating window was. I felt like the bike's characteristics were easy to understand. They did basically the same thing from each track, so there wasn't this big need to chase some sort of different bike balance based on the situations. Everything it did just kind of kept carrying over. In my opinion, they've hit a really happy medium between the suspension settings and the chassis itself. Chassis, like I said, has a lot of give, a lot of feel. It works great under acceleration. It really soaks up a lot of things that it feels like a lot of the other bikes in this test do not. But at the same time, the suspension is just stiff enough. It keeps it up in the stroke, and it keeps it with just enough of an aggressive nature that you can push it. Some of the prior YZ450s have had that chassis comfort, but I've also felt the suspension has been really soft. The bike ends up feeling like a couch because it's just so plush and moving so much. And because of that, you can sometimes get a false sense of confidence because you think, oh, I can throw it through any bit of rough chop and I'll make it to the corner fine. But by the time you got into the rut or the berm, the bike is still wallowing around and moving through the stroke. Some of the changes they made to this bike, the chassis is softer, more compliant in areas on the 20, but they've also gone stiffer on the suspension settings. It rides a bit higher in the stroke, and it's definitely a lot easier to push on, a bunch more confidence inspiring. Setting change wise, the only thing I really played with, and I think most of the guys then tested, was fork setting. It's a little bit soft. Luckily, the bike is so forgiving, it doesn't really make the imbalance stand out, that it dives a little bit on the front end, but it was easy to change with just a couple clicks of compression depending upon the track. Really, if I were to make any further changes, I would maybe try to pull away a little more engine braking, playing with their Yamaha Power Tuner app. Just try to tweak on that mapping a little bit so there's a little bit of a freer roll on entry, and maybe try to get some of that transition off the front end, because I love how comfortable it is in its base setting. Not that going much stiffer cost it much, but on some of the really, really rough tracks in the day, I liked it a little closer to the base setting. I really didn't play with the shock all day. It was by far out of the box the best for accelerating across square edges, out of ruts that had hard edge walls, stuff that would make the bike really upset on other machines, make the rear ping pong around in those ruts. This bike didn't have that. Between the comfort and the power character, the torque, the way it rolls on, it just pulls itself through and across that chop a little bit better than anything else in the class. Personally ran the sag at 102 millimeters. Most of the test was held between 100 and 102 on this bike. I know a lot of people instantly go, oh, you know, the classic 105. The Yamahas don't really work that well in that range, specifically the 450. The 250, you can get away with that, but if you start going to 105, 107 on the 450, it won't turn. It will push, and you'll get someone like guys have been saying with the YZ450, man, it just doesn't turn in. It's a chassis that's been specifically designed and has been worked around that 100. So I know some guys gone as high as like 98 millimeters on it. And definitely having short legs, normally that would bother me because I would feel like it'd be super stink bug. It'd be riding up my back end all the time, but They've done a lot of work in this generation specifically since the 18 about the seat profile and how low the rear subframe area is, so that when it's sitting at the 102 mark, it doesn't feel that high in the rear end. So it feels a lot more balanced at 102 than I expected. And for me, that was overall good. The motor is a huge talking point. It's a torque monster. It has great low to mid character. It pulls from gear to gear so well. That gear spacing is amazing to work with. It's so consistent. You just kind of ride and you have a feeling of what each gear is capable of. It isn't spread where second short, third feels kind of long, fourth back short. Like each one is a nice even gap. Feels like they put a lot of effort into that. I think Yamaha does. Their 250 and 450 are some of the few bikes I don't feel the need to gear up that much. Like you can change the gearing to change how short and long each gear is, but I don't feel like you're changing gearing to try to fix a gear gap problem ever on this bike. Like I said, the power it's not as snappy or responsive as the Honda, maybe not as much as the KX, but it still has a lot more response than the KTM or the Husky in this test. But the way it rolls on, the amount of torque it can put down, and the way it drives that power forward is outstanding. When we rode tracks with a lot of wide open throttle positions, it was good, but it really impressed me when we got on tracks where you had to apply the power out of the corner and roll from quarter to half throttle motions. It's lively enough that it's fun and exciting, gets up and goes, but it's not so brutal it breaks, just yanks your arms off. The prior YZ sometimes have been a little lurchy in the corners, and I've really worked on that. So basically, as you apply that power, it puts it down, but as you're able to just crank out of the corner, it's impressive how quickly the bike will accelerate forward. I noticed on this bike specifically, I felt like I was getting section to section quicker. I was shutting off earlier on jump faces because I already had enough momentum by the time I got there. So that power is very pliable and it's very easy to put to the ground. Another big thing for me, one of the changes I noticed with the 20 is the chassis character, the way it rolls in the corners, the way you drop in. Yeah, it's on corner entry, it's not a Suzuki or Honda. It doesn't have insane turn-in response, but it will track in a lot better than any bike they've had in the past. It doesn't, you don't start from outside and just last minute decide I'm gonna shoot all the way to the inside across some chop. It's not gonna respond that quickly, but it does have traction now. It is enough that you can push on corner entry and roll in, but what I really love is that mid to exit corner feel on this bike. Like I've talked about that edginess in the bottom of ruts, the chop, the way the power rolls on, the torsional flex they've changed in the chassis, how you can lay that power on and the bike will actually stay down. It's putting down a good amount of power and it doesn't want to stand up as much on exit as the old bike. I felt like in prior years, as you grab a handful on corner and exit, the bike would tend to stand up for me and I'd have to rear steer it a little bit on exit. Now it's able to stay down and carry that momentum so much better, and you feel it on corner exit based on how quick you've exited that rut or that berm. My negatives came from the ergos itself. They started with the bar mounts in the forward hole this year with them rotated back, and for me with short arms, that was just overkill. I couldn't reach. I was up right here on the airbox lid the whole time. I was overweighting the front. I was very uncomfortable standing. I went back to the back hole on the triple clamp like the base setting was from last year. They have changed the bar mount height, more similar to 250, so forward it felt still tall. When you go back, you realize it's lower. It's 10 millimeters lower like the 250, which I really like personally at my size. Even though a lot of people say, because you look at the shrouds, you think big bike, it definitely feels longer than some of the bikes in the class, but it's kind of small in other aspects. The one that's weird is the foot peg to seat height is pretty compact. At my size, it's okay. At taller riders, it seems to be a little much. You also sit so low in the seat, where you bring your leg up in the corner seems to be about the widest point of the shrouds. That was a little bit of point of contention. Also the side plate on the right side hangs up on boots a little bit. It's just a couple of ergo things that really kind of irked me on the bike because I love the chassis, I love the motor. Suspension takes very few changes to tweak and dial in. Yamaha did update the front brake this year. I still would prefer, it's got a floating rotor on it. I, for my personal taste, would probably go to a solid rotor. I still feel like it could be a little more precise on actuation. But man, that's really it. I don't have a huge list of complaints, and we're actually going to pull up a little bit from the other test riders in the test. So we're gonna start with fan favorite, Jeff Walker. Jeff is, I think, floating around that 170 pound, just breaking under weight mark, 6'1". His points on the Yamaha. The suspension was dang near perfect out of the box, makes the entire track feel smooth, even at the end of the day. The motor is powerful, but still very smooth and usable. The brakes were surprisingly good. Overall, the bike was very confidence-inspiring. I felt like I had been riding Yamahas my whole life after one lap. That's what Jeff said. And then his bad was it can feel a little heavy under extremely hard decel and transfers a lot of weight to the front end, which caused me to tuck in a few places unexpectedly. So that's what we were talking about, that fork adjustment. I don't know to the extent of how much Jeff did. I think he did the largest fork change out of all of us on this bike. Definitely at his speed, his size, it was the most notable. That drop in the front, that's where I was saying going a bit stiffer is definitely a huge help. And also maybe playing with the Yamaha motor tuner app to try to get a little less decel feel out of the engine so it doesn't transfer that weight back to the front. The one thing I will say it's interesting about this chassis is even when it does dive a bit to the front, it doesn't get head shake like some bikes will. It'll definitely tuck if you get it over the front too much, if it weights it. But for me, it was still really stable even when the front would dive. Zach Petty is another pro level rider that I use for a lot of testing. He's raced a little bit of Supercross and Nationals, trains a ton of kids locally. Poor Petty's the smallest in our group. I think he's a little under 150 pounds. He's like 5'8", maybe 5'7", he's shorter than me. Let's see here. On the engine, the initial crack of the throttle was very smooth and usable on hard pack and slick parts of the track. The bike was really easy to control with the throttle, and the RPMs were easy to keep in the right place. He said high throttle positions, there was a bit of wheel spin. The motor kept pulling really good until the taper off point. And then he said he did feel a little bit of a wall though. Basically, he said it feels rich, like it carries really good power, and then he feels like it noses over a little bit when you get way up to the RPM limiter. He noticed, I think, that nose over feel more than a few of the other bikes in the class. And I will say, even though we've been talking about how good the low to mid is on this motor, it's decent up top. It's not putting out the horsepower the Honda is right now up top, and it doesn't carry like the KTM and the Husky do to high RPMs. I would still put it above the Cowie and the Suzuki handily in the high RPM range. So it's not killing it up there. It's decently competitive. It definitely, most of its strength is that low to mid, but it has just enough up top that it can carry there if needed. But that's really not the place to take it if you're trying to maximize what you can do with that bike. He made another comment about the gearbox being spaced like really even, long, short shifts. Everything was super consistent. Using second, third, fourth, all tracks was great. Third and fourth gear was my favorite on the bike, the weight carried between those two. Suspension was really good out of the box. Frame felt good, not too rigid, not too soft, just the right amount of comfort. But also the bike feels a little wide in the front based off leg position. And he also felt like the seat had that dip where he kind of settled into a little bit, and he felt like that could have been a little bit better. He also said playing around with the bar mounts was interesting. He found positives in the front and back position. Ultimately, I think changing around the bar bend or customizing that a little bit more would be good for him. Real major negative on the bike had to do with overall tight ruts. He felt the tightest ruts on the track were a little difficult on the Yamaha. He felt a little small on the bike based off his positioning, and kind of gave him a little bit less confidence and control in the most tight rut situations when on this bike. So it was definitely his like standout negative per se. Big positive was once again exiting rough corners, the rear wheel, the way it settled down, the way it produced traction and comfort was phenomenal. I guess a point I kind of missed there is riders and what they personally ride. Of course, Jeff Walker is racing a Honda, has raced a Husqvarna earlier this year. Zach Petty is currently riding a Honda 450 as well, has raced Yamahas. Past couple years has raced a Cowie, I think in the past 3 years as well. Jeff picked the Yamaha for the win. In his personal rankings, I said I picked it for the win as well. Petty picked the Honda. The Honda is his win, so the Yamaha was second on his list. My next rider, Maddox Soto, who's kind of a local B-level rider, high 160 pound range, 5'10". I said a top 5 B-level kid around here. He currently rides Suzuki's, has raced Yamahas right before that, came off 125s a year before that. He picked the Yamaha for second. He was also a Honda win guy, so that's pretty much, like I said, the two, me and Jeff on Yamaha win. My third rider, which we'll get to, Derek Kasky, Yamaha win. And then Petty and Soto for Honda win, but Yamaha second. Soto's case, once again, very few changes to suspension, really got box, frame had a perfect balance between rigidity and soft. Kind of that comment he was mostly talking about was ergos were his negative, where he sat into the bike, where his leg was in the middle of the ruts wasn't confidence inspiring in some situations. The seat dip to the bar height wasn't his favorite. Really liked the motor overall, not the most aggressive in the class, but extremely usable. and put down great power and great traction. Last guy I'll talk about, Derek Caskey, also currently riding a Honda. I mean, hardcore Honda dude. This guy, I think that's all he's ever bought, possibly. But always gives it a fair shake. He picked the Yamaha personally for the win in the out-of-the-box situation. Derek is 6'1", 6'2", around that 190-pound mark. Just definitely an overall pretty big guy. Definitely somebody weight spike difference. He's my vet guy in the group, my 40-plus vet. Kind of took guy, probably not the best cornering speed in the world, but he's really willing to jump anything. So he's always looking for a bike that can definitely help him in the corners, looking for something with enough power to get him over everything he wants. Really, once again, he's a huge fan of the Yamaha engine. He still wishes, I think, there was a little bit more initial response, but likes the overall output of the bike. Fits him for his short shifting style. It powers in the right places down low to mid. He said, once again, just like everybody else, the ergos. There are certain things about the front position bar mounts I think he likes, certain things about the back position bar mount. The bar height was a little bit low for him and a little bit swept back for his size. And then this compartment area was a little bit off as well. Things that he said he would tweak on, either if it's peg height, seat height, something like that, if he were to further mess with the bike. Said the suspension was phenomenal. Once again, out of the box, just fork changes were required. Ran, like the rest of us, 100 to 102 millimeters of sag. Really negatives were just ergos. So that's all 5 test drives. As you can see, we agree on a lot of things. It's engine's phenomenal, chassis is phenomenal, suspension was easy to tune. Ergos were the only real major problem with the bike in general, and it's the thing that comes up with each rider. Really doesn't matter what their size is. There's just things about this that aren't perfectly balanced out that need to be tweaked. So what would I change on the bike aftermarket? Like I said, the Shootout is always placed as which one are you going to take stock off the showroom floor in the way we could adjust them, go race them, go ride them. But if you had to spend a little money, I think there's definitely room to work with their Yamaha Power Tuner app, which doesn't cost anything. There is some room maybe on the suspension setting on the fork to dial it in a little better for you. And then mostly working on the ergos to just try to make it suit your height, your style of riding. I think that's where the money would be the best spent. But anyways, make sure you check out the rest of these videos as I put them out the rest of this week. Give us a subscribe, hit the little bell notifications, like me on Instagram, check out my Patreon account. We're doing a bunch of giveaways. Thank you very much for supporting this, and check out the rest of the Shootout videos.